The room was built to make people feel small. 40 feet of glass looked out over downtown Houston, morning sun glaring off steel and glass. A long mahogany table ran down the center of the boardroom on the top floor of Langston Tower. Leather chairs, crystal water glasses, silver nameplates, men in dark suits and women in tailored blazers shifted in their seats, murmuring over printouts they already knew by heart. On the wall behind the head chair, in brushed steel letters, the old name still shone: Langston Materials Corporation. For 3 generations, that name had meant money, respect, and power in Texas. Now, in April of 2025, it mostly meant trouble. At the head of the table, Malik Omar Langston adjusted his cufflinks for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. His charcoal suit was perfect, his tie was perfect, his perfectly trimmed beard was perfect. But his eyes had that faint, sleepless redness that no tailor could hide. He cleared his throat, leaned toward the microphone, and watched the room quiet down. Reporters filled the back rows with cameras and tablets. Behind them, cameras from 3 financial networks had gone live. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth over the speakers, "shareholders, partners, members of the press. I know you've seen the numbers. I know you've heard the rumors. But I want to say this clearly. Langston Materials is facing a challenge, not a collapse. This is temporary." On the big screen behind him, a stock chart glowed. The Langston ticker sliding downward in a red line that made a slow, sickening curve. He gestured toward it as if it were a minor irritation. "Our expansion into European biotech has encountered headwinds," he went on. "But we are in talks with lenders, we are restructuring debt, and as of yesterday, I have personally secured additional voting shares from within the family trust. I now," he paused. "Let the words hang. I now speak to you as the controlling voice of this company." There was a rustle of reaction, some skeptical, some hopeful. A few of the older men near the front, the ones who had known his grandfather, just stared at him. Malik smiled anyway. That polished CEO smile head, practiced in the mirror since he was 22. "At my invitation," he continued, "we are also welcoming a new strategic partner to the table. You all received the email this morning." He lifted his chin slightly. "Ariadne Capital Group." That name moved through the room like a sudden draft. Heads turned. A reporter in the back whispered, "Ariadne? Seriously?" Some of the foreign guests in the front row, an older German banker, a Japanese executive with silver hair, a French woman in a navy suit, were stone-faced, paying close attention. Malik went on, the practiced confidence back in his voice. "They have offered a capital injection and a comprehensive restructuring plan. Whatever intentions they bring, hostile or friendly, you have my word. As CEO and as the largest shareholder," he pressed the phrase "largest shareholder" hard, "that I will protect the interests of this company and of every investor in this room." He set his hands on the table. His fingers were damp. "Now, I'm sure you have questions." He barely got the word questions out before a voice cut through the room like a snapped cable. "Questions? You call this a challenge?" It was Calvin Hayes, a tall, gray-haired man in his 70s at the front row, leaning on his cane. He had once been Charles Langston Sr.'s favorite rival and most respected critic. These days, he just looked tired. "You've wiped out half of our value in 6 months," Calvin said. "My people's pensions are tied up in your stock. You call that temporary, Malik?" There was a murmur behind him, louder now. The reporters could smell blood. Malik forced a chuckle. "Calvin. With all due respect." "With all due respect," Calvin snapped. "You are not your grandfather. Charles built something. You are burning it for fun." Voices rose. A few investors actually stood up, waving their hands, shouting questions all at once. "What about the German lenders? Is it true JP Morgan withdrew? Are you filing chapter order?" Malik said into the microphone. He raised his hands. "Everyone, please," he didn't finish, because at that moment, the heavy double doors at the back of the boardroom swung open with a dull, decisive thud. Every head turned toward the noise. Light from the hallway poured in, turning the doorway into a bright rectangle. For a second, all anyone could see was a silhouette, slim, upright, walking forward with slow, unhurried steps. The sharp click of heels echoed over the marble floor. The security guards at the door hesitated, then stepped aside without being told why. As the figure came into the light, the room fell into a strange, thick silence. She was maybe early 30s, her skin a rich, warm brown, her posture straight as a blade. A pearl-white suit fit her like it had been poured onto her body, the jacket cut to emphasize her waist and shoulders, the pants breaking just right above her heels. Her hair, long and dark, was swept up into a low, elegant bun that bared her high forehead and graceful neck. She wore almost no jewelry, simple diamond studs, a slim watch and very little makeup. But her lips were painted a deep wine color, and her eyes were so calm and cold that even the most powerful men in the room felt, for one brief second, like they might actually be the ones being evaluated. She didn't hurry. She didn't smile. She simply walked straight down the center aisle between the rows of chairs, as if this room had always belonged to her and she had just taken a short, inconvenient detour before coming back to claim it. As she passed the front row of foreign guests, the German banker Dr. Klaus Schmidt stood up so abruptly his chair tipped backward and fell. He didn't pick it up. He simply bowed his head to her with both hands on the table. The Japanese executive from Nomura rose as well, bowing slightly from the waist. Even the American from J.P. Morgan, a man who'd refused Malik's calls for 3 straight weeks, stood and nodded with something like respect. The silence deepened. Reporters lifted their cameras again, but for the moment no one dared speak. At the front of the room, Malik stared as if someone had hit him in the back of the head with a brick. For a moment, his mind refused to make the connection. The woman in the white suit, with that authority in her walk, with bankers from 3 continents rising to acknowledge her, could not possibly be Amara, he heard himself say, but it came out as a whisper no one else heard. No, he thought. No. That's ridiculous. His wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife, was a quiet little country girl from Louisiana who slept in the attic of his mother's house, wore faded jeans on her days off and kept her eyes lowered at the dinner table. She mopped floors. She burned toast. She could not read a simple contract. She was not this. Security! He barked suddenly, voice cracking over the speakers. Panic made him loud. Security, what is going on? Who let her in here? The 2 security guards near the door looked at each other, then back at the woman in white, then at the row of international bankers who had just stood up for her. Their feet stayed planted. Sir, one of them started helplessly. The woman in the white suit reached the end of the aisle and stopped in front of the long table, just a few feet from Malik. Up close, he could see tiny rain-dark freckles at her hairline, a small scar near her jaw, details he had never bothered to notice before. She didn't look at him. She reached for the second microphone on the table, the one meant for guests, and tapped it lightly with one manicured finger. 2 soft taps echoed out over the speakers, cutting through Malik's ragged breathing and the restless shuffle of bodies. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was clear and low, not loud, but the kind of voice people leaned forward to hear. For a heartbeat more, Malik clung to denial. Then she turned her head just enough for him to see her face in profile, really see it, without the shadow of his own contempt covering it. It was her, his wife, the woman he had thrown out of his River Oaks mansion into a Texas thunderstorm less than a month ago, with nothing but a suitcase and a packet of divorce papers. The woman he had called useless, illiterate, dead weight. The woman he had tricked into signing away what he believed was her only value. Standing at his board table, in a suit that cost more than his entire wardrobe, being greeted like a queen by the very bankers who had ignored him. A low, disbelieving sound came out of his throat. That's not he started, but his mouth felt dry. She finally turned to look at him. Not up at him, not down at him, just straight, as if they were strangers meeting for the first time. "Mr. Langston," she said evenly, her Texas accent softened but still there, the way old money in Houston sometimes sounded. "You're still as loud as ever, I see." A few people actually gasped. Calvin Hayes sat back down very slowly, his eyes never leaving her. Malik's hands curled on the table. "Who?" he swallowed. "Who do you think you are, barging in here? This is a shareholders meeting. You don't belong in this room." She tilted her head slightly, studying him like something under glass. "That's the problem, Malik," she said. "You still have no idea who belongs where. She turned away from him and faced the room, placing one hand lightly on the edge of the table. Her posture was relaxed, but there was no doubt in that instant who held the center of the stage. "My name," she said, her voice carrying to the back without strain, "is Amara Elise Vance. Some of you know me as Amara Langston. A few of you," she glanced at the foreign guests, "know me by another name entirely." She let a beat pass. "In the markets," she said, "they call me Ariadne." The word hung there. On the back wall, one of the reporters actually dropped his pen. The French woman from the Paris Fund pressed her lips together, eyes shining with a mix of vindication and awe. If you were watching this live on television, you might not have understood the weight of that simple sentence. But the men and women at that table did. They knew the rumors about the unseen strategist who had predicted the 2008 crash while still a teenager, who had warned about the 2024 tech bubble, who had quietly steered billions for sovereign funds and investment banks from behind encrypted screens. They knew the name Ariadne. They had spent years trying to figure out who she was. And now, the person they had imagined in 10 different forms, a gray-haired professor, a reclusive hedge fund billionaire, a whole secret team, stood here in the flesh as a 30-something black woman from Louisiana, wearing a white suit and her ex-husband's last name. "Before we talk about this company," Amara said softly, "let's go back a little, not far, just 3 years." She glanced at the cameras in the back of the room, at the red lights that meant millions of people might be watching. "Because to understand what's happening today," she said, "you need to know what happened in a very different room. Not up here on the 62nd floor." Her eyes warmed, almost imperceptibly, as if seeing another place behind the glass and steel. But on an old marble floor in a mansion in River Oaks, one morning in January, when nobody was listening, not even the man who lived there. She met the lens, just for a second, and before we go there, she added quietly, "I want to ask you something. If it were you, if you had given 3 years of your life to someone who despised you, and they finally threw you out in the rain with nothing," she paused, "would you forgive them? If you had the chance, would you stay and save them? Or would you walk away and never look back?" She didn't wait for an answer. The room didn't have one yet. She drew a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the listener gently back in time. "It started," she said, "on a cold morning in January 2025, in Houston, Texas, in a house that was big enough to hold 3 families, but somehow still felt too small for one woman to breathe." And just like that, the bright, merciless boardroom dissolved in the listener's mind, giving way to another image, a spotless marble floor in a grand River Oaks living room, a woman on her knees, and the story truly began. By late February of 2025, the cold in Houston wasn't in the air anymore. It was in the numbers. Up on the 53rd floor of Langston Tower, the conference room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and anxiety. Screens along the walls glowed with charts, red lines slanting down like bad omens. Department heads sat in a row, shoulders pulled tight, waiting to be yelled at. At the head of the table, Malik Omar Langston didn't disappoint. "So let me get this straight," he said, his voice calm in a way that made it worse. "We poured hundreds of millions into a European biotech venture, and now the German lenders want to pull their credit lines?" The finance director tried to answer, but his voice broke. "Yes, sir. They're refusing to roll over the short-term debt. They're concerned I won't pay them back," Malik finished for him. "Say it plain, silence." Malik's jaw worked. For a fleeting second, he felt like a boy again, standing outside his grandfather's study, hearing Charles Langston Sr. raise his voice at some unfortunate manager. He had sworn back then that he would be stronger, smarter, untouchable. Now he was sweating through his shirt in a room with his own employees. He turned to the big screen on the far wall. The Langston Materials stock price flickered, each new tick a few cents lower. He could almost feel the market's judgment through the glass. "What about the Americans?" he asked. "Has J.P. Morgan called back?" His executive assistant, Marcus Reed, shifted in his chair and kept his eyes on his notebook. "No, sir. They declined the last 2 meetings. And Nomura? They're reevaluating their exposure," Marcus said softly. Malik laughed once, a sound with no humor. "Fantastic," he muttered. "The whole world is reevaluating. He pushed back from the table so suddenly his chair rolled. He walked to the window, staring down at the city laid out below like a circuit board, every building a chip in a machine he used to think he controlled. "We have assets," he said finally. "We have patents. We have real contracts in semiconductors. This biotech stumble doesn't erase that." "That's true," the finance director said quickly. "But the timing, the liquidity, fix the timing," Malik snapped. "Find liquidity." He knew he was being unfair. There were only so many ways to slice the same numbers. But anger felt better than fear, and he clung to it. When the meeting finally broke up, the executives filed out quietly, relief and resentment mixed in their faces. Only Marcus remained. "Sir," he said, after a moment, "there is one more option." Malik rubbed his forehead. "If you say cost-cutting one more time, it's not that," Marcus said quickly. "It's internal." He hesitated, and that made Malik turn around. "Internal how?" Malik asked. Marcus swallowed. 20% of the voting shares are still technically in a family trust, in Mrs. Langston's name. For a second, Malik didn't react. Then his eyes narrowed. "That trust is locked," he said. "Granddad set it up that way. It only moves if she signs." Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir, but she is your wife. If she were to sign a power of attorney, or a transfer, you could consolidate control, reassure the board, negotiate with Ariadne from a position of strength." The name Ariadne buzzed in the back of Malik's mind like a fly. The mysterious fund he had agreed, in a moment of desperation, to invite to the table. "She can't even read a contract, Marcus," he said. "You've seen her. She spent 3 years in that house. Doesn't touch a computer. What are we even talking about?" Marcus shifted, uncomfortable. Sometimes people don't need to read every clause if they trust who's handing them the pen. The words hung there. Malik looked at him sharply. "You're saying I should, what, trick my wife?" "I'm saying," Marcus replied carefully, "that the company is in trouble, and the family has resources it isn't using." That afternoon, Malik left the tower more exhausted than he wanted to admit. The sun was still high over downtown, traffic humming, the world going about its business as if nothing were wrong. By the time he pulled into the circular drive of the River Oaks mansion, the mask was back on. Expensive car, expensive suit, the smell of his cologne reaching the front door before he did. Inside, the house felt as it always did during the day, big, polished, and oddly empty. A museum of someone else's good taste. He found Amara on her knees in the foyer, her hair pulled back, her hands red from scrubbing the grout between marble tiles. "Get up!" Loretta's voice snapped from the stairs. "You're in the way." Amara rose, murmured an apology, and moved aside with the bucket. Malik watched her for a moment. She was slimmer than when they married, her shoulders narrower, as if the house had been shaving bits of her away day by day. She avoided his gaze, just as she always did. "Malik, baby," Loretta cooed, gliding down the stairs. "You're home early. Everything all right at the office?" "Fine," he lied. "Just a long day." Loretta kissed his cheek, then shot Amara a look that could curdle milk. "Did you hear that? A long day. Maybe try not to be such an eyesore when men who actually work for a living come home." Amara said nothing. That was her defense most days. Silence. Malik almost walked past her, almost took the usual route to his bar, to his room, to his phone and the comfort of Tiana's voice. Almost, but Marcus' suggestion and the shadow of the stock chart followed him into the hallway. "Amara," he said suddenly. The sound of her name in his voice made both women pause. She turned, eyes surprised, as if she wasn't used to being addressed at all, let alone gently. "Yes?" she asked. "I've got a charity event this weekend," he said, forcing his tone into something soft, "for a children's foundation, the Post Oak. I want you to come with me." Loretta blinked. "You want her to go? In front of people?" Amara stiffened, clutching the rag in her hand. I wouldn't know how to act," she said quietly. "Those places, all those cameras, it'd embarrass you." "It's not about impressing anyone," Malik said. "It's about showing who we are. As a family." The word felt strange on his tongue, but he pushed through. "There'll be a big donation," he went on. "I'd like you to sign the papers. As Mrs. Langston. It would mean a lot." Loretta laughed once, sharp. She can't even sign her name straight, Malik. Amara's cheeks colored. She looked at the floor again. Malik stepped closer, lowering his voice, playing the part he hated but needed. "I'll be with you the whole time," he said. "You won't have to say much, just smile. Sign where I point. Can you do that?" Amara hesitated. Somewhere deep inside, a small, stubborn voice warned her. But louder than that was another feeling, older and more tired. The wish, just once, not to be hidden. "Yes," she said finally. If it helps." "Good girl," Loretta muttered, already mentally rearranging the household schedule. "Well, find something decent for you to wear. Try not to look like you crawled out of the laundry room." That Saturday night, the Post Oak Hotel at Uptown Houston gleamed under chandeliers and camera flashes. Luxury cars lined the valet lane. Women in gowns stepped out on the red carpet. Men adjusted their tuxedo jackets and their public smiles. Malik arrived in a black tux, his arm around a woman no one had expected to see. "Is that Mrs. Langston?" one society reporter whispered to another. "I thought she never came to these." Amara wore a simple, long dress in a soft champagne shade. Her hair was pulled into a low bun, her makeup understated. Standing among sequins and diamonds, she looked almost plain, but there was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself, a steadiness in her eyes as the flashes popped. Malik's hand tightened on her waist, guiding her toward the cameras. "This is my wife, Amara," he told the reporters, his voice warm. "She doesn't like this kind of crowd much, but she has a big heart. Tonight's donation is really her idea." Amara heard that and felt something twist inside her. He could lie so easily, so beautifully, when he wanted to. Inside, after the speeches and the photo ops, Malik led her away from the ballroom, down a quiet hallway to a private suite. "Just to sign the papers," he said lightly. "You must be tired." "Well, do this quickly." 2 men were waiting inside, Caleb Miles, Malik's attorney, with a thick leather folder, and a security guard by the door. "Mrs. Langston," Caleb said nervously, avoiding her eyes. "Thank you for coming." On the low table in front of the sofa, the folder lay open, papers stacked neatly. The top page had a lot of small print in 2 languages. Malik's hand covered the title. Amara sank onto the edge of the sofa, her dress brushing her ankles. The room felt suddenly cold. "So many pages," she murmured. For a donation?" "It's just procedure," Malik said. A flash of irritation crossed his face, but he smoothed it away. "Trust me, you don't need to understand every word. That's why you have a husband." He flipped through quickly, then laid 1 page in front of her and tapped a line at the bottom. "Right here," he said. "Just sign your name, Amara Elise Langston. You've practiced that enough, haven't you?" Her hand trembled as she took the pen. The letters on the page seemed to swim for a second. Stock, transfer, agreement. Words she understood far better than he imagined. She lowered her head, letting her hair fall forward to hide her eyes. On the outside, she was the same woman who had knelt on a marble floor, who had swallowed insults with her breakfast. Inside, another part of her quieter, sharper was very much awake. She began to write, slowly, each letter shaky, as if she were copying something she didn't quite recognize. Amara, Elise, Langston. And then, so small no one in the room saw it but her, she altered the last stroke, just enough to make the signature legally wrong. She set the pen down with a small, uneven breath. That's it?" she asked. Malik snatched up the paper, glanced at the messy scrawl, and smiled, pure satisfaction in his eyes. "That's it," he said. "You did great." Caleb looked as if he might be sick. By the time the gala ended and the last car had pulled away from the hotel, the sky over River Oaks was low and heavy. A storm rolled in from the Gulf, thick with spring rain. Back at the mansion, the fight was not dramatic. There was no screaming match, no thrown vases. Malik didn't need theatrics. He had papers. He tossed the signed contract onto the console table like a winning lottery ticket, then dropped another set of documents at Amara's feet. "Those are your divorce papers," he said. "I've already signed. You came to this house with nothing. You'll leave the same way." Loretta watched from her armchair, arms folded, a small smile at the corner of her mouth. Amara bent to pick up the papers, but her fingers couldn't seem to close around them. The words blurred, not because she couldn't read, because she could. Outside, thunder rolled. Rain began to hit the windows in hard, flat sheets. "Malik," she whispered, you said this was for the children." He shrugged. "The only child I'm worried about is myself. You think this company is a charity case? This is business, Amara. Something you know nothing about." He walked to the front door, opened it wide. Wind pushed rain into the foyer, dampening the marble shed scrubbed that morning. "Get out," he said. "By the time I wake up, I don't want to see you on these floors again." For a moment, she stood there, looking at the open door, at the rain, at the man she had promised, an old, dying man she would try to love. Then she stepped outside. The cold wet hit her like a slap. The suitcase Loretta had thrown after her burst open, spilling a few dresses and a pair of worn shoes into the puddles on the front steps. Behind her, the door slammed shut with the heavy final sound of wood and money. She stayed on her knees for a breath, two, the rain washing away what was left of her makeup. Then she put a hand on the rail and pushed herself up. Her back straightened. Her eyes cleared. Somewhere between the gate and the corner payphone 2 blocks away, the woman they had called useless finally let the last of her illusions go. Under the yellow streetlight, soaked through, she lifted the old handset and dialed a long, coded number she knew by heart. On the other end, miles away, a familiar voice answered in crisp, accented English. "Miss Vance," Daniel Chen said. "I've been waiting for your call." "Daniel," Amara replied, her voice calm, steady over the roar of the rain. "It's time." "Time for what, ma'am?" "To activate the Ariadne protocol," she said. "Call Deutsche Bank. Call JP Morgan. Call Nomura. The net goes out tonight." She hung up, closed her eyes, and let the storm soak her completely. In the River Oaks mansion behind her, they thought they had thrown away a burden. They had no idea they had just set free the woman who held all their strings. By the second week of April 2025, Houston's spring had turned warm and soft, but inside the financial world, the air was thin and sharp. For 2 quiet weeks after that stormy night in River Oaks, something unseen moved beneath the surface of the markets. Certain funds began to sell Langston Materials stock in an orderly, deliberate way. Others, far away in Frankfurt, Tokyo, and New York, received private calls and encrypted messages. And early on a Tuesday morning, every member of the Langston board, every major creditor, and every large institutional investor woke up to find the same email in their inbox. Subject: Open letter to the board of Langston Materials Corp. From Ariadne Capital Group. It was not long or dramatic. It was precise. Ariadne Capital, it said, had been following the company's situation closely. The crisis, in their view, did not come from the core business, but from arrogance and poor management. They believed Langston could be saved. They had already taken a stake. They would send a representative to the emergency shareholders meeting scheduled that afternoon. At that time, they would present a restructuring plan and a commitment to inject enough capital to retire all immediate debt. 2 things made the letter land like a thunderclap. 1. The promise of money without asking the banks to take a loss. 2. The signature at the bottom. Ariadne. No last name, no title, no photo. Just the name that had haunted boardrooms and trading floors for more than a decade. That same morning, high above downtown Houston, Amara Elise Vance stood in front of the window of the presidential suite at the Four Seasons and watched the city wake up. From here, Langston Tower was just another tall building of glass and steel. You wouldn't know that her whole life, her debt, her promise, her anger had once been tied to that logo on the side. Daniel Chen stood a polite distance behind her, a leather folio tucked under his arm, tablet in his hand. 8 years of working with her had not made him any less formal. "Flight confirmations from Frankfurt, Tokyo, and Paris are in," he reported. "Dr. Schmidt from Deutsche. Mr. Tanaka from Nomura, Madame Delacroix from the Paris Fund. JP Morgan's vice chair is already downstairs." "And the lawyers?" Amara asked without turning around. "Sullivan and Wells' team landed last night. Aisha is reviewing the footage again now, just to be sure." Amara gave a small nod. On the glass in front of her, Her own reflection floated over the skyline, hair pulled into a sleek bun at the nape of her neck. No jewelry yet, just the clean line of a silk camisole under a robe. She looked like what she had become, a woman who belonged in boardrooms and first-class cabins. She did not see the woman who had scrubbed floors on her hands and knees, not in her face at least. But she could still feel that woman in the ache between her shoulder blades. Daniel hesitated. "You don't have to go this far," he said quietly. "The position is secure with just the 20%. With Ariadne Capital's stake, you could." "It's not about secure, Daniel," she said. "It's about honest math." She finally turned, walked to the low table where a single framed photo lay. It was old, a little faded. Charles Langston Sr. in a hospital bed, oxygen tubes in his nose, still trying to sit up straight in his gown. A much younger Amara at his side, no makeup, braids pulled back, eyes too big for her thin face, holding his hand like it was the only solid thing in the world. 3 years, she murmured. "I told him it'd give Malik 3 years. I did that. I stayed. I waited. I watched. I gave him so many chances to see me." She smiled without humor. He chose not to. Daniel lowered his eyes. He had been there for that last meeting in Zurich, when the second trust documents were signed. He had been the one to receive the notification at 1 a.m, the night the mansion door slammed on her. "Are you nervous?" he asked. Amara listened to her own heartbeat. It was fast, but steady. "Not for myself," she said. "For them." She set the photo down and straightened. "All right," she said. "Let's go take back my ex-husband's favorite toy." On the 62nd floor of Langston Tower, the atmosphere was nothing like the calm, controlled air of the suite. The auditorium was full to bursting. Board members, big shareholders, small retirees with a handful of shares, reporters with camera crews, financial bloggers streaming from their phones, all pressed into rows of chairs, murmuring. Tiana Rhodes stood just off to the side of the stage, near the curtains. She looked perfect, as she always did in public, a sharp navy dress that hugged her waist, her hair in big soft curls, lips glossed. Only her fingers betrayed her, twisting a napkin into tighter and tighter knots. "This is going to work," Malik said under his breath, more to himself than to her. "Once the transfer goes through, once Ariadne sees we have a strong, controlling block, they'll have to negotiate." Tiana tried to smile up at him. "Of course," she said. "You'll show them you're still in charge." She did not mention the fact that he had been calling the banks for weeks with no answer, or that she had read the open letter twice and had the sinking feeling that whoever had written it was not the kind of person you bluffed. "Ladies and gentlemen," the corporate secretary's voice boomed, "please take your seats. The emergency shareholders meeting is about to begin." Malik stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone and his tie in one motion. He launched into the same speech he had rehearsed in front of his bathroom mirror. Temporary headwinds, core strength, bold expansion, unfortunate timing. His words rolled out smooth, practiced, like a commercial for a product that no longer worked. Behind him, the big screen showed the red line of the stock's fall. He talked about liquidity constraints, about negotiations in progress. He mentioned that he had resolved certain internal family shareholding issues. He let that sit there, like a quiet threat. He mentioned Ariadne last. "As of this morning," he said, "we have received a formal indication of interest from Ariadne Capital Group. They have requested to address this meeting. Whatever their intentions, partnership, strategic alliance, acquisition, I stand before you as the largest shareholder of Langston Materials." He held his head high. "And I will not allow this company to be dismantled." From the front row, Calvin Hayes snorted loudly and started to rise. Malik braced for another public rebuke. He didn't get that far. The heavy doors at the back of the room opened with a weighty, echoing sound. Every head turned, as if pulled on strings. The first thing people saw was light the bright white from the corridor, spilling into the darker room. Then the silhouette of a woman, walking inward, the rhythmic click of heels on marble ringing clear over the microphone feedback. She did not hurry. She did not look down. Tiana leaned forward, squinting, a frown forming between her brows. "No," she whispered. "That can't be." As the woman stepped out of the glare and into the softer light of the auditorium, details came into focus. A suit, not black or navy like the men's. but a soft, exact pearl white. The jacket cut clean, the pants tailored, the fabric falling just so. Underneath, the suggestion of a cream blouse, a hint of gold at her wrist. Her skin glowed a deep brown against the pale fabric. Her hair, once often tucked under a scarf or thrown into a loose bun at the back of the kitchen, was now swept into an elegant knot low on her neck. Her makeup was subtle, except for her lips, a deep, confident burgundy. Her eyes were the same, only now they were not lowered. They were level, direct, cool. Tiana's hand went numb. The crumpled napkin fell to the floor. "Amara," she breathed. "Oh my God." Up on stage, Malik froze. For a moment, his mind did the thing human minds sometimes do when faced with something too big to accept. It refused. It told him he was looking at someone else. Someone who just happened to have the same cheekbones, the same tilt to her head. Then she got closer, and the lie couldn't hold. His wife walked down the aisle between the chairs, like she had never been on her knees on anyone's floor. As she passed the front row of foreign guests, something happened that no one in that room, not even the reporters, had expected to see. Dr. Klaus Schmidt, head of European risk at Deutsche Bank, stood up, not slowly, not politely. As if pulled, he bowed his head to her. Next to him, Mr. Tanaka from Nomura rose as well, nodding deeply, hands at his sides. On the other side, the American representative from J.P. Morgan straightened his tie and inclined his head like a man greeting an equal, not a beggar. The ripples of that simple gesture moved through the room like wind through tall grass. Malik's fingers tightened on the edge of the podium. "Security!" he snapped, his voice too loud, cracking on the microphone. "What is this? How did she get in here? This is a closed meeting. Get her out. Now." The two security guards at the door glanced at each other. They had been told to watch for protesters, disgruntled employees, maybe an angry small investor. No one had mentioned a woman the European banks bowed to. They didn't move. The woman in white reached the front, stepped up onto the stage, and stopped a few feet from Malik. Up close, he could see the small scar near her jawline, the one from when Shed slipped on the porch steps that first winter, and he hadn't even looked up from his phone. She did not look at him. She reached for the unused second microphone, tested it with 2 soft taps, then lifted it to her mouth. "Good afternoon," she said. "I hope I'm not too late." Her voice was steady, warmer than the words. She could have been welcoming guests to her own party. "This is a private meeting," Malik said, fighting to regain control. "You have no right to be here. You don't hold shares. You don't speak for anyone." She turned then, finally, and looked straight at him. The years collapsed. Just for a moment. He saw, overlaid, the girl in a thrift store dress at their courthouse wedding, hands shaking when she signed the marriage license. The woman who had taken his grandfather's hand on that hospital bed and promised to take care of him. "I speak," she said quietly into the mic, "for 51%. A murmur rippled through the room, louder this time, almost a wave. Malik laughed. It sounded manic even to his own ears. "You're insane," he said. "You think because you signed something you understand corporate law? You can't even read, Mr. Langston." The interruption came from the third row, where a blonde woman in a charcoal suit sat with a slim briefcase at her feet. Aisha Wells rose, smoothing her jacket, and walked toward the small table with the laptop connected to the big screen. "I believe this is where I come in," she said. Amara stepped aside, letting her pass. "For those who don't know me, my name is Aisha Wells," she said, her diction crisp. "I'm lead counsel for Sullivan and Wells, representing Miss Amara Vance, also known to some of you as Amara Langston." She clicked a key. The stock chart vanished from the screen behind them, replaced by a grainy image of a hotel suite. A coffee table, a leather folder, a woman in a champagne dress on the edge of a sofa, her head bowed. The angle was from a button-level camera. The sound, however, was painfully clear. Malik's voice rang through the speakers, smooth and impatient. "It's just your name. What are you afraid of? Or do you want me to write out a model for you to copy like a grade school student?" In the room, some people flinched. On the screen, the man in the tuxedo tapped a line on the paper. The woman in the dress, Amara, took the pen with shaking fingers. "So many letters," her recorded voice trembled. "I don't know how to read it. What if I sign in the wrong place?" Off-screen, Caleb Miles tried to speak. Mr. Langston, legally, having someone shut up, Malik's recorded voice snapped. Just shut up and let her sign. The live Malik lunged toward the laptop. Turn that off. That video is doctored. You don't have consent. Two Langston security guards stepped in front of him. This time, when they moved, it was without hesitation. If you'll notice, Aisha continued calmly over the noise. We have clear audio and video of Mr. Langston deliberately misleading his wife about the nature of the document she was signing. He believed her to be illiterate. He used that belief to attempt to obtain control of her 20% family shares. She tapped another key. The screen zoomed in on the signature line of the contract, showing Amara Elise Langston in uneven loops. Under Texas corporate law, and under the terms of the Langston Family Trust itself, Aisha said, a signature must reflect the signer's legal name and must be affixed with full knowledge of the contract's nature. In this case, she enlarged the image further, highlighting the last letter of Langston, where a tiny extra curve broke the shape. Miss Vance intentionally altered her own signature in a way that makes it legally invalid, while documenting the fraud being attempted against her. The contract Mr. Langston waved at you earlier? She looked up at the room, then at Malik. From the moment the ink dried, it was void. The room erupted. Questions, curses, whispers, the scrape of chairs. Calvin Hayes let out a low whistle and shook his head, almost impressed despite himself. Malik stood frozen, color draining from his face. No, he said softly. No, that's not possible. She can't. But it didn't matter what he believed. Daniel stepped up now, carrying the black folio with the red Swiss bank seal. If that were all, he said, his tone measured, we might be talking only about an attempted fraud within a marriage. But there is more. He held up the document so the front rows could see the embossed logo. 3 years ago, in Zurich, Mr. Charles Langston Sr. created a second trust account, Daniel said. This one was not made public. It contained 30% of his personal shares in Langston Materials. It named Miss Amara Vance as beneficiary, under one condition. He looked at Malik, not unkindly, that his grandson never betray her. Amara felt the words land in her own chest as surely as they landed on Malik. She kept her face still, but her hands curled slightly at her sides. The night Mr. Langston threw his wife out of their home, Daniel went on, our office received notice from the Swiss trustees. They had been sent the video you just saw, along with documentation of Mr. Langston's affair, the forged financials presented to this board, and testimony regarding his treatment of Miss Vance. He opened the folder, took out a single-page confirmation. As of 1 o'clock that morning, he said, the second trust released in full, 30% transferred to Miss Vance. Aisha stepped back to the microphone, tying it together in a neat, brutal bow. So? She said. The 20% in the original family trust remains in Miss Vance's control. The 30% in the secret Zurich trust has been added. She glanced at Amara, then at the room. Ladies and gentlemen, the math is simple. Miss Amara Elise Vance now holds 51% of the voting shares of Langston Materials Corporation. There are moments when a group of people share the same thought so completely that you can almost hear it. 51. Control. Security moved behind Malik, just in case. On stage, something inside him finally broke. His shoulders sagged. The polished CEO mask slid off, and for a second he looked like what he was, a frightened man who had just realized he was not the most important person in the room. You set me up, he whispered. You stayed in that house for 3 years, waiting to do this to me. Amara lifted her microphone again. For the first time since Shed walked in, there was a flicker of emotion in her eyes, not triumph, not cruelty, tiredness, a deep, old tiredness. No, Malik, she said quietly. I stayed in that house for 3 years because I gave your grandfather my word. I hoped you might prove him wrong about you. She turned away from him, facing the sea of faces below. As majority shareholder, she said, her voice firming again, I call for an immediate vote to remove Mr. Malik Omar Langston from the position of Chief Executive Officer and from all managerial roles within this company. The corporate secretary, pale and sweating, fumbled with his papers. All those in favor, please. Hands went up like a fast-growing forest. Calvin's hand was first, high and steady. Even some of the men who had once toasted Malik's deals now raised theirs, their eyes on the floor. Against? The secretary asked weakly. A few scattered hands. Not enough to matter. Aisha did a quick calculation. Madam Chair, she said, the new title hanging there, real and solid, excluding your own 51%, 98% of the shares represented here have voted in favor of removal. Amara nodded once. She looked back at Malik. Mr. Langston, she said, you're fired. The words dropped into the stunned silence like a stone into a still pond. For a second, nothing moved. Then, all at once, sound rushed back in, reporters shouting, cameras flashing, someone in the back actually clapping before catching themselves. Malik lurched forward, tears starting in his eyes. Amara, you can't do this, he said hoarsely. I'm your husband. She held his gaze for a long, quiet moment. No, she said, you were my test, and your time is up. She turned away as security took his arms. Now, she said into the microphone as Malik's protests faded behind her, let's get back to business. For a long moment after the words, you're fired, left Amara's mouth, the auditorium hung in a stunned kind of half-silence, as if the air itself hadn't quite caught up. Then everything happened at once. Security moved in on Malik, not roughly, but with the firm, impersonal grip of men who had been given a direct order from the person now signing their paychecks. He jerked his arms, tried to shake them off. You can't do this, he shouted, voice hoarse in the microphone before someone mercifully cut the feed. This is my company. My name is on that wall. You think you can walk in here from the attic and Mr. Langston, Aisha said quietly, staying close enough to be heard without the mic. For your own sake, stop talking. You're only adding to the record. He looked at her like he didn't understand the words, then passed her to Amara, standing straight behind the podium, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, the other still holding the microphone at her side. Amara, he pleaded, his voice breaking. We can fix this. We can talk. Don't do this in front of them. She studied him for a heartbeat, taking in the loosened tie, the sweat damp at his temples, the way his eyes had gone from angry to frightened. I gave you 3 years to talk, she said at last. You chose to talk to everyone but me. She turned away. Please escort Mr. Langston out of the building, she told security. Do not allow him access to any financial systems. His credentials are to be disabled immediately. Yes, ma'am, one of the guards said. They walked him down the central aisle, his expensive shoes leaving faint squeaks on the polished floor. As he passed row after row of shareholders and employees, he could feel their eyes on him, some pitying, some cold, a few openly satisfied. At the back, just inside the doors, Tiana stood frozen, one hand clamped to her chest. For a second, she thought he'd turn his head, look for her, say something. He didn't. His gaze was locked on the stage, on the woman in white, who no longer glanced his way. When the heavy doors closed behind him, shutting out his protests, the room exhaled. Amara lifted the microphone again. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice cutting through the noise without effort. We have indulged this family drama long enough. Langston Materials is not a soap opera. It is a company in crisis, with thousands of employees and billions in obligations. Let's address that. The murmurs faded. People leaned forward. For those who came only to watch a spectacle, she went on, I'm sure you've gotten your fill. For those who still care whether your investment survives, this next part is for you. She nodded once toward Daniel, who stepped to the side and pulled up a set of slides that were very different from the stock chart. Cash flows, asset lists, market maps. In the last 2 weeks, Amara said, Ariadne Capital has conducted a full forensic analysis of this company's accounts. We have identified the bleeding, and we have a plan to stop it. There was a shift in the room. The gossip crowd braced to be bored. The serious people sat up straighter. She walked them through it, not with jargon for its own sake, but with the clean clarity of someone who understood the bones of a balance sheet the way a surgeon understands anatomy. The European biotech expansion? Sold, fast, at a controlled loss to a private equity fund willing to take the risk in exchange for upside. The glittering but unprofitable prestige projects? Cut. The core business in advanced semiconductor materials? Doubled down on, with renewed capital and long-term supply contracts negotiated quietly over the previous week. To address the immediate concern, she said, glancing at the front row where Klaus Schmidt sat, the $50 million due to Deutsche Bank tomorrow morning has already been wired from Ariadne's accounts. Heads snapped toward Klaus. He cleared his throat, all but flustered. That is correct, he said. The funds have arrived. Gasps, then a smattering of spontaneous applause from the back. These were not people cheering for Malik's downfall now. They were cheering because, for the first time in months, someone had put real money on the table in the right direction. For J.P. Morgan, Amara continued, shifting into English so plain it felt like a conversation, your credit lines will be secured against our semiconductor IP portfolio, not against speculative biotech assets. For Nomura, we're willing to reinstate your orders under a 5-year exclusivity on our next-generation materials. Madame Delacroix, your fund's equity stake will be protected through warrants in the restructured entity. Her voice moved smoothly between addresses, between languages when she needed to, but always came back to that same calm register. The overall message was simple. I know what went wrong. I know how to fix it. And I have already started. By the time she finished, even the more cynical reporters in the back were no longer scrolling their phones. The woman who had walked in as a scandal had, in less than an hour, become something else. A way out. Now, she said, we're going to adjourn this general session for today. My team and I will meet with board members and major creditors separately to go through the details. For minority shareholders, she let her gaze drift to the older folks with paper share certificates in hand. We will issue a full summary in plain English within the week, and we will open a hotline to answer your questions. She set the microphone down gently, as if the whole thing were no more dramatic than closing a business presentation. People began to stand, talking at once. Some tried to push toward the stage. Reporters called her name. Cameras flashed. Amara ignored them for the moment. She stepped back into the wings, out of the direct lights, and exhaled. It was only then that she noticed Tiana. The other woman stood near the side door, half hidden by a curtain, looking smaller without the safety of the CEO at her side. Their eyes met. Tiana flinched as if she'd been slapped. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Tiana turned on her heel and walked away, fast, her heels clicking down the hallway toward the service elevators. The underground parking garage beneath Langston Tower was cold and echoey, smelling of oil and concrete. The sounds of the crowd upstairs came down only as a faint vibration in the ceiling. Tiana hurried between rows of parked cars, her heart thudding against her ribs. Her navy dress suddenly felt too tight around her chest. Her hand shook so much she had to press the key fob 3 times before her red Maserati finally flashed its lights and unlocked. Come on, she whispered, grabbing at the handle. As she pulled the door open, bright headlights bloomed in her face from the opposite lane. A black Bentley had slid silently into position, blocking the only exit from her row. The driver's door opened. Amara stepped out, no longer in the white suit, but in a sleek black one that made her look even more precise, more controlled. She had changed after the meeting somehow, in the middle of everything. Going somewhere, Miss Rhodes? She asked, her voice carrying easily in the hollow space. Tiana's mouth went dry. She shut the car door slowly, as if maybe, if she moved gently enough, she could turn back time 2 hours. I wasn't feeling well, she stammered. I thought I'd go home and rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Amara walked toward her at an unhurried pace, heels ticking against the concrete. You still have a home to go to? She asked mildly. I'm impressed. You're ahead of most of your allies. Tiana winced. Look, she said, the brittle composure cracking. Whatever you think about me and Malik, I don't think, Amara cut in. I know. She stopped a few feet away, not close enough for Tiana to reach out and grab her, not far enough for the other woman to pretend she wasn't there. For the first time since she had walked into that boardroom, Amara allowed a hint of something sharp to show in her eyes. 3 years, she said softly. You stood in my kitchen. You drank coffee I brewed. You smiled at me and called me girl like we were cousins from the same street. And then you laughed with him about how stupid I was. Tiana's chin trembled. It wasn't like that, she tried. You don't know what he told me. He said you didn't care about him, that you were using him. He said He lied, Amara said. That's what he does. But you, Miss Rhodes, you chose to believe the version that suited you. Tiana dropped the act. She fell to her knees on the cold concrete, the fabric of her dress scraping, her voice rising in pure panic. Please, she sobbed. Please, Amara. I know I was wrong. I know I was stupid. But I was in love with him. You know what that does to a woman. He promised he'd marry me. He promised. Amara's face did not soften. Get up, she said. Don't get your knees dirty on my account. Tiana stayed where she was, clutching at the air. You can ruin him, fine. You already did, but don't ruin me. I'm pregnant. Do you hear me? I'm carrying his child. The words echoed off the concrete pillars. Something like silence stretched between them. Then Amara smiled. It was a very small, very cold smile. You're pregnant, she repeated. I believe that. Relief flooded Tiana's face, just for a beat. But I don't believe it's his, Amara finished gently. She nodded toward Daniel, who had gotten out of the Bentley and now approached with a manila folder in hand. We intercepted a certain medical report 6 months ago, she said. Malik's fertility test, the one the doctor sent to the wrong email first. Tiana's fingers dug into her own arms. No, she whispered. Azoospermia, Amara said. She didn't savor the word. It was just a fact. 0 viable sperm. The report we gave him said something different. I altered it. I needed to see how far the two of you would play this little air game. Tiana swayed where she knelt. Whose baby is it, Tiana? Amara asked quietly. Your trainer? One of the vendors you've been taking kickbacks from? Or just whoever happened to be convenient that month? The color drained from Tiana's face. She opened her mouth, closed it again. I don't care, Amara said. You can lie to whatever man you please. That's between you and him. I'm here about something else. She nodded again to Daniel, who opened the folder and slid out a much thicker stack of papers. For 3 years, Amara went on, you used your position as executive assistant to the CEO to steer contracts toward friendly vendors. In exchange, they wired money into a certain account in the Cayman Islands. Total: $8.3 million. She let the number sit there. Unfortunately for you, Miss Rhodes, she said, no account is invisible to Ariadne. Tiana stared at the documents as if the pages might catch fire and burn themselves up. Her breath came shallow and fast. What are you going to do? She whispered. Before Amara could answer, the echo of tires on concrete announced a new arrival. 2 HPD squad cars rolled into the lane, lights off but presence unmistakable. The doors opened. 4 officers stepped out, one of them holding a small tablet. Miss Tiana Rhodes? He called. Tiana turned very slowly. This is a mistake, she said faintly. Someone is setting me up. We have a warrant for your arrest, the officer said, reading from the screen. Suspicion of embezzlement, money laundering, and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. His words blurred into a recitation she had only ever heard on television. As they cuffed her, Tiana twisted to look back at Amara, eyes wide, mascara streaking down her cheeks. You're a monster, she spat. You think you've won? You won't sleep at night. You won't, Amara stepped closer, just enough so her words would be for Tiana alone. 8 years, she said. With good behavior, maybe less. Plenty of time to think about that slap you gave me on my own front steps. Tiana jerked as if struck again. Then they led her away, her heels scraping and catching, the sound of her crying trailing behind until car doors thudded and engines started. Daniel watched the taillights disappear up the ramp. That's 2, he said quietly. Amara breathed out. The rush of justice didn't feel like triumph. It felt like a door closing. Let's get back upstairs, she said. We still have a company to rebuild. The work that followed was not glamorous. It was not dramatic in the way the boardroom showdown had been. It was long hours in glass-walled conference rooms, numbers on screens, contracts on laptops, late-night calls to Zurich and Tokyo and Paris. In the first week, Amara slept more at the Four Seasons and in a cot in her new office than anywhere else. She moved fast. The old CFO, who had nodded along to Malik's risky expansions as long as the bonuses came, was asked to resign. So was the head of HR, who had quietly blacklisted qualified candidates because they didn't fit the culture. Layers of useless management were peeled back. People who had kept their heads down and done the real work under Malik's erratic leadership were pulled forward. "You're not here because you like me," she told one of the new division heads, a woman from Ariadne's London office. "You're here because you're good and because you don't owe this family anything." She cut the company's fleet of luxury cars. She sold the half-finished vanity office tower in Dubai. She turned the River Oaks mansion from a private estate into an asset on the books, one she fully intended to reclaim for business purposes. When word of that last part reached Loretta's hospital room, the older woman almost tore out her IV. Loretta Jean Langston woke to the antiseptic smell of a downtown medical center and the unfamiliar weight of an empty purse. She had fainted in the shareholder meeting, somewhere between 51% and "you're fired." The paramedics had taken her vitals, muttered about blood pressure and stress, and brought her here. Now, 2 days later, she wanted one thing. "Manuel," she said into her phone, her voice still raspy, "bring the car around. I'm coming home." On the other end, there was a long, uncomfortable pause. "Mrs. Loretta," Manuel said finally, "I no longer work for the Langston family. Miss Vance, Mrs. Vance, let us all go. The house has been sealed." "Sealed?" Loretta sat up too fast. The room spun. "What are you talking about? That is my house. It was purchased with corporate funds," Manuel said. "They say it's an executive residence, ma'am, for the acting CEO. She's not." Loretta's voice broke on a cough. "She's not staying there. She wouldn't dare." "I don't know, Mom," Manuel said softly. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't even be talking on this line." The call dropped. Loretta stared at her phone, then at the plastic bracelet on her wrist, then at the hospital bill left in the little folder by the bed. She dug for her wallet, pulled out a gold credit card like it was a weapon, and thrust it at the nurse. "Run this," she said, "and get my clothes. I'm leaving." An hour later, the nurse brought her the card back. "Mom," she said, not unkindly. "It was declined." "Impossible," Loretta snapped. "There's no limit on that card. It's tied to my son's account." "That's the problem," the nurse said. "All of Mr. Langston's accounts are frozen pending investigation. Someone from a charity program has already taken care of your bill. But we can't run this card anymore." Charity. The word hit Loretta harder than the diagnosis on her chart. While Loretta tried to find her footing in a world where her name no longer opened doors, Malik stumbled through a different kind of freefall. He left Langston Tower that day without his tie, without his badge, without his phone security, collected that at the front desk, along with his company car keys. For a few days, he lived in a kind of numb denial. He went to the River Oaks mansion, only to find the gate locked, and a security guard he didn't recognize stationed outside. "Sir, executive residence is closed," the man said. "You're not on the list." "I own this house," Malik snapped. "My grandfather owned the company," the guard said. "The company owns the house." He tried the luxury high-rise where Head kept the apartment with Tiana. The concierge, who had once greeted him by name, now looked away. "I'm afraid the unit is under review for forfeiture," she said carefully. "You should have received notice." He hadn't. The only notices Head received lately were legal ones. He slept 2 nights at a friend's place in Midtown, on a couch that smelled of old beer and expensive cologne. On the 3rd morning, he woke to find his friend already dressed for work. "Look, man," his friend said, not quite meeting his eyes. "This thing with Amara, with Ariadne, it's messy. I can't be seen taking your side. I've got shareholders too." Malik laughed then, a short broken sound that made the other man flinch. "Get out," his friend said softly. "Before my wife wakes up." That afternoon, Malik bought a bottle of cheap whiskey from a corner store, a brand he would once have sneered at, and drank it in an alley behind a chain restaurant, staring at his own reflection in a greasy puddle. The rain came again, like it had that night when Head slammed the door on Amara. Cold, insistent, soaking his suit until it clung. Somewhere in his mind, a thought formed: go to the tower. Not to reclaim, just to see her. He staggered out of the alley, onto the slick asphalt of a side street. A horn blared, headlights flashed. He turned his head too slowly. The delivery truck hit him with a sound like the world cracking in two. When Malik woke, it was to white light and the rhythmic beep of monitors. The world swam in and out of focus. There was pain, distant and huge, like something pressing down on his whole body. He tried to move his right leg. Nothing happened. "No," he croaked, voice raw. "No, no, no." A nurse appeared, efficient and tired. "You're awake," she said. "That's good. Try not to move too fast." "My leg?" he gasped. "Where is my leg?" "Under that bandage," she said, not unkindly. "What's left of it? You were hit by a truck. The surgeons did what they had to do to keep you alive. You're lucky to be here at all." He turned his head toward the TV bolted high on the wall. Some financial news channel was running a segment. Under the leadership of newly appointed chairwoman and CEO, Amara Elise Vance, formerly Langston, the anchor was saying, Ariadne Global Group, formerly Langston Materials, has rebounded spectacularly. Analysts are calling it one of the most dramatic turnarounds of the decade. A clip played, Amara on the steps of the tower, speaking to reporters, her hair caught by the spring breeze, her face calm. Malik let his head fall back against the pillow, tears blurring the screen. "I lost everything," he whispered, not to the nurse, not to anyone in particular. "And she. He couldn't finish. The nurse adjusted his IV, checked his pulse. She had seen men cry like this before, after car wrecks, after heart attacks, after late diagnoses. It was always the same mixture of fear, pain, and something heavier, regret. In the weeks that followed, while Malik learned to stand on a cheap prosthetic and filled out forms for disability payments, Amara moved her office into the top floor of what was no longer called Langston Tower. The new sign went up quietly one Sunday morning, cranes lifting the fresh metal letters into place as the city church bells rang. Ariadne Global Group. For the people driving by on the freeway, it was just another change in downtown's ever-shifting skyline. For Amara, watching from her window with a mug of black coffee in hand, it was something else. An ending, yes, but also a beginning she had never quite let herself imagine. She stood there a long time, watching the workers secure the last letter. Then she turned back to her desk, to the stacks of proposals and reports and the blinking light on her phone. There were still debts to settle, still systems to rebuild, still ghosts to lay to rest. Justice, she had learned, wasn't a single moment in a boardroom. It was a long, quiet work. 1 year later, the Houston summer heat rolled in thick and slow, but inside Ariadne Global's glass tower, the air was cool and bright. People no longer called it Langston Tower. The old name had come down months ago. The building wore its new identity easily now, like a suit that finally fit. On the 62nd floor, in an office that looked out over the shimmer of downtown traffic and the slow curve of the bayou, Amara Elise Vance finished signing a stack of documents and set her pen aside. "Last one for today," Daniel said, gathering the folders with a small, satisfied smile. "The Singapore deal is done. They're very happy, by the way." "Good," Amara replied. "I like our partners happy. Happy partners don't panic when the wind changes." He hesitated by the door. "Car to the airport is in 40 minutes. If you don't leave this desk, you're going to present at Davos in a wrinkled dress." She huffed a quiet laugh. All right, I'm going." When he left, the office fell still. For a moment, she let herself drift. The past year slid through her mind in flashes, factory floors humming again, employees walking out with their heads higher, emails from retirees who'd watched their shares crawl back from the brink, the long nights of negotiation. The mornings Shed stood in this same spot, wondering if she was doing right by a man who'd died believing in her. On the credenza behind her, the photo of Charles Langston Sr. still sat in its frame. She took it in her hands now, tracing the edge of the glass with her thumb. "I kept my promise," she murmured. "Maybe not the way you hoped, but I did." Was there regret? Not for Malik. That ache had burned itself out long ago. What remained was something quieter, a sadness for what could have been if he had chosen differently, if he had ever bothered to look at the woman right in front of him. She set the photo back in its place. Outside the office, the company was no longer a battlefield. It was just a company again. People worrying about supply chains and product launches instead of scandals and survival. Justice had rearranged the rest of the players too. Loretta now lived in a small rented apartment on the edge of town, far from River Oaks. Sometimes she stood in the grocery store aisle, staring at store-brand coffee, remembering the imported beans she used to send back if they weren't ground just right. She told anyone who would listen that Shed once had a driver and a chef and a house with marble floors. Most people smiled politely and moved on. Tiana wore orange now instead of navy. The walls around her were concrete, not glass. In the quiet hours between head counts and lights out, she had more than enough time to replay every choice Shed made, every laugh, every lie. The slap Shed given Amara in that driveway came back to her again and again, sharp as the crack of a judge's gavel. And Malik had vanished from Houston's circles so completely that sometimes newer employees at Ariadne didn't realize the Langston in older reports was a real person, not just a name. On a rainy weeknight in a worn-out diner on the north side of town, he shuffled from sink to table with a tray of dishes, the plastic apron tied crooked over his faded shirt. Every step with the prosthetic was a reminder. Every ache in the stump was a bill that would never be fully paid. The television mounted in the corner played the evening business news, sound turned down low. He wasn't watching until he heard the name. Ariadne Global's CEO, Amara Vance, took center stage in Davos today. He looked up. There she was, on the other side of the world, standing beneath bright white lights, a deep emerald dress skimming her frame, hair in a clean high bun. Flags from a dozen countries hung behind the stage. She spoke into a slim microphone, hands steady, eyes clear. Even without the sound, he knew that cadence. Calm, certain. The opposite of the man he had been. The caption at the bottom of the screen read, "The Ariadne Miracle, from unknown analyst to queen of global finance." Someone whistled softly at the bar. "That woman's something else," the man said. "Came out of nowhere, they say. Must be nice to live like that." Malik looked down at his own hands, cracked from detergent and hot water, then back at the screen. She smiled for the cameras, that small, private half-smile he had once seen only in the quiet moments on a porch, over a cup of coffee, when he wasn't really looking. Now the whole world saw it. The news cut to another segment. The moment was over. He turned back to the sink, the clatter of plates loud in the sudden silence of his head. Up in Switzerland, the applause in the Davos hall rolled like a soft tide. Amara stepped away from the podium and, later, out onto a cold balcony overlooking the snow. The mountains rose dark and solid against a silver sky. Her breath steamed in the air. She wrapped her hands around a paper cup of too-weak coffee and let the wind cool the heat in her cheeks from the lights. Was she happy? Yes. But not in the simple way people imagined. Power did not erase the years on the marble floor. Success did not rewrite the nights she had slept in a cold attic, listening to a man she married drive away to another woman. Those things lived with her, quietly, like old scars, not bleeding anymore. Just there. She thought of all the people watching, all the stories they might be carrying. Women who had stayed too long with men who did not see them. Men who had squandered chances they hadn't even known they were being given. Children raised under roofs where money was plenty but kindness was rationed. If there was a lesson, it wasn't neat. It was this. Power reveals who we already are. Given 3 years and every opportunity, some people grow, others only grow more cruel. And when the bill comes due, it arrives with interest. She tilted her head back, looking up at the clouded Swiss sky. "Granddaddy," she whispered, "just once," the old name slipping out on a white breath. "I did what you asked. Now I'm going to do what I choose." Behind her, someone called her name for a photo with a head of state. She went back inside. And somewhere, between the clink of dishes in a Houston diner and the gleam of glass in a Swiss resort, the story of Amara and Malik and the Langston name settled into its final shape, not as a love story, not even just as a revenge tale, but as a reminder. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is stop begging to be seen and simply stand up, walk out of the rain, and claim the life that was always yours. If you've stayed with this story all the way to the end, I truly appreciate you. If it spoke to you, or made you think, you're warmly invited to subscribe so you don't miss the next life story. If there were parts you didn't like, or moments you wished had gone differently, tell me about it in the comments. Your thoughts help me grow and shape future videos to fit you better. And if this story touched you, even just a little, tap the like button so I know to bring you more stories like this. Thank you for sharing your time with me today. When you're ready, click on the end screen and choose another story to keep us company a little longer.